Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Gonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. We're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 87, Text 32. It's got quite a long purport, but we'll go through it. Nishutava Mayaya Brahmam Amishvagatya Brisham Tvayi Sudiyo Bhave Dadati Bhavam Anuprabhavam Katam Anuvartatam Bhavabhayam Tavayat Kuti Srijati Muhustrinemir Anhava Sharaneshu Payam Nishutava Maya Brahmam Amishvagatya Brisham Tvayi Sudiyo Bhave Dadati Bhavam Anuprabhavam Katam Anuvartatam Bhavabhayam Taveyad Kuti Srijati Muhustrinemir Abhavakcharaneshu Payam Nishutava Maya Pramanamishvagatya Brisham Tvayi Sudiyo Bhave Dadati Bhavam Anuprabhavam Katam Anuvartatam Bhavabhayam Tavayat Kuti Jati Muhustrinemir Abhavakcharaneshu Payam Nishutava Maya Brahmam Amishvagatya Brisham Tvayi Sudiyo Bhave Dadati Bhavam Anuprabhavam Katam Anuvartatam Bhavabhayam Tavayad Kuti Srijati Muhustrinemir Abhavakcharaneshu Payam. Thank you very much for chanting. Word for word. Nirshu, among humans. Tava, your. Maya, by the illusory energy. Brahman, bewilderment. Amishu, among these. Avagatya, understanding. Risham, fervent. Tvayi, unto you. Sudya, those who are wise. Abhave, unto the source of liberation. Dadati, render. Bhavam, loving service. Anuprabhavam, potent. Katam, how. Anuvartatam, for those who follow you faithfully. Bhava, of material life. Bhayam, fear. Tava, your. Yat, since. Ri, of the eyebrows. Kuti, the furrowing. Sujati, creates. Muhu, repeatedly. Trinami, Trinami. 3 rims in the 3 phases of time, namely past, present, and future. A, not. Bhavat, from you. Sharaneshu, for those who take shelter. Bhayam, fear. And the translation, this is BBT translation, so the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, including the purport. So translation, this is one of the Shrutis talking. The wise souls who understand how your Maya deludes all human beings render potent loving service to you, who are the source of liberation from birth and death. How indeed can fear of material life affect your faithful servants? On the other hand, your furrowing eyebrows, the triple-ringed wheel of time, repeatedly terrify those who refuse to take shelter of you. In the purport, the Vedas reveal their most cherished secret devotional service to the personality of Godhead only to those who are tired of material illusion, which is based on a false sense of independence from the Lord. The Vajrasaneyi Samhita 32:11 of the White Yajurveda contains the following mantra: Paritya Bhutani Paritya Lokan Paritya Sarva Pradisho Dishascha Upastaya Pratama Jam Ritasya Tmanatmanam Abhisam Vivesha. After passing beyond all the species of life, all the planetary systems, and all the limits of space in all directions, one approaches the original soul of immortality. Then one receives the opportunity to enter permanently into his domain and worship him with personal service. The proponents of various contending materialistic philosophies may consider themselves very wise, but they are in fact all deluded by the Supreme Lord's Maya. Vaishnavas recognize this pattern of general delusion and submit themselves to the Supreme Lord in the devotional moods of servitude, friendship, and so on. Instead of the heat and strife of philosophical quarrel, the pure Vaishnavas experience only delight at every moment because the object of their love is he who brings an end to material entanglement. And the devotees of Lord Vishnu enjoy constant pleasure not only in this life but in future lives. In whatever births they take, they enjoy loving reciprocation with the Lord. Thus, the sincere Vaishnava prays, Nata yoni sahasreshu yeshu yeshu pramami eham tatra tatra juta bhaktir achutastu drida tvayi. Wherever I may wander, O Master, among thousands of species of life, in each situation may I have firmly fixed devotion to you, O Achyuta. This is from the Vishnu Purana. Some philosophers will question how the Vaishnavas can overcome their material entrapment without thorough analytic knowledge of the entities Tvam, you, the Jiva, and Tat, that, the Supreme, and without developing a sufficient hatred of material life. The personified Vedas here answer that there is no chance of material illusion continuing to act on devotees of the Lord, because even in the earlier stages of devotional service, all fear and attachment are removed by the Lord's grace. Time is the root cause of all fear in this world. Indeed, with its three divisions of past, present, and future, it creates terror at the prospect of impending disease, death, and hellish suffering, but only for those who have failed to obtain shelter at the feet of the Supreme Lord. As the Lord himself says in the Ramayana, Lanka Kanda, 1833, Sakrit eva prapanoyas tavasmiti chayachate abhayam sarvada tasmai dadami etad vratamama. To whomever even one surrenders to me, pleading, I am yours, I give eternal fearlessness. This is my solemn vow. Furthermore, in the Bhagavad Gita 7:14, the Lord says, Daivihi esha gunamayi mama maye durachaya mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. Vaishnavas do not like to waste their time in prolonged and fruitless wrangling over dry philosophic subjects. They would rather worship the personality of Godhead than quarrel with philosophical adversaries. The Vaishnava's understanding concurs with the essential message of revealed scripture. These devotees' conception of the supreme absolute truth as the infinite ocean of personality and loving pastimes in his worshipable forms of Krishna, Rama, and other divine manifestations, and their conception of themselves as his eternal servants, amount to the perfect conclusion of Vedanta philosophy in terms of the entities Tat and Tvam. The personality of Godhead and his emanations, such as the Jiva's souls, are simultaneously different and non-different, just like the sun and its expanding rays. There are more Jivas than anyone can count, and each of them is eternally alive with consciousness. As the Shrutis confirm, Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetanam, Katha Upanishad 5.13 and Svetashvatara Upanishad 6.13. When they are sent forth from the body of Mahavishnu at the beginning of material creation, the Jivas are all equal in the sense that they are all atomic particles of the Lord's marginal energy. But according to their differing conditions, they divide into four groups. Some are covered by ignorance, which obscures their vision like a cloud. Others become liberated from ignorance through a combination of knowledge and devotion. A third group of souls become endowed with pure devotion with a slight mixture of desire for speculative knowledge and furtive activity. Those souls attain purified bodies composed of perfect knowledge and bliss with which they can engage in the Lord's service. Finally, there are those who are devoid of any connection with ignorance. These are the Lord's eternal associates. The marginal position of the Jiva soul is described in the Narada Pancharatra. Yatatastam tuchit rupam svasamvedyat vinigatam ranjitam guna ragena sajiva iti katyate. The tatastha potency should be understood as emanating from the Lord's samvit knowledge energy. This emanation, called the jiva, becomes conditioned by the qualities of material nature. Because the minute jiva lives within the margin between the Lord's external illusory potency maya and his internal spiritual potency chit, the jiva is called tatastha, marginal. When he earns liberation by cultivating devotion to the Lord, however, he comes completely under the shelter of the Lord's internal potency, and at that time he is no longer tainted by the modes of material nature. Lord Krishna confirms this in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samitit yaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. The object of the soul's worship is realized in three aspects of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Impersonal Brahman is like the radiant effulgence of the sun, The supersoul or Paramatma is like the sun globe, and the personality of Godhead Bhagavan is like the presiding deity within the sun, complemented by his elaborate entourage and paraphernalia. Or, to cite another analogy, travelers approaching a city from a distance cannot at first distinguish its features, but rather see something vaguely shining ahead of them. As they come closer, they may discern a few of the taller buildings. Then, when they are sufficiently close, they will see the city as it is, a bustling metropolis with many citizens, residences, public buildings, highways, and parks. In the same way, persons inclined to impersonal meditation may at best gain some realization of the Supreme Lord's effulgence, Brahman. Those who approach closer can learn to see him as the Lord in the heart, Paramatma, and those who come very close can know him in his full personality, Bhagavan. In summary, Srila Sridhar Swami prays, Samsara Chakra Krakachar Vidirnam Udirna Nana Bhava Tapat Taptam Kathanchit Apanam Iha Prapanam Tvam Udarat Shri Nirhare Nirlokam. O Shri Nirhari, please deliver those human beings who have suffered all kinds of torments and been ripped apart by the sharp edge of samsara's wheel, but who have now somehow found you and are surrendering themselves unto you. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshur-militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shita Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Romapada Swami Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It's a rather extensive purport and very detailed. I'll read the statement of the Shrutis once again, so it's clear what we're discussing. The wise souls who understand how your Maya deludes all human beings render potent loving service to you, who are the source of liberation from birth and death. How indeed can fear of material life affect your faithful servants? On the other hand, your furrowing eyebrows, the triple-rimmed wheel of time, repeatedly terrify those who refuse to take shelter of you. So, as a starting point for this particular statement by the Shrutis, this particular prayer of Srila Sridhar Swami is rather wonderful. So that translation for his prayer was, Shri Narahari, please deliver those human beings who have suffered all kinds of torments and have been ripped apart by the sharp edge of samsara's wheel, but who have somehow found you and are surrendering themselves unto you. So a great deal of sympathy has been expressed to persons who've come to the point of taking up devotion to Lord Krishna, because there's an understanding that, through making this connection, they actually become conscious of the torment that they've experienced through going through regular materialistic life, just being under the control of the modes of nature. So finding Lord Krishna and surrendering oneself to him means, and this is, I'm taking this from Srila Satchidananda Swami, who's writing in the introduction to Manaha Shiksha. And this is what he says. As we follow Raghunath Das Swami, because he's the author of Manasa Shiksha, you will see some open wounds in your heart and mind into which the words of Raghunath Das Goswami will go. It will not be easy. You will have to be very honest, because he presents a deep psychological analysis of the obstacles we face on our path, and it will be embarrassing. So just to put things into perspective, because carrying this knowledge of the torments one has actually gone through in materialistic life, it means that one's going to now, having taken to devotional life, we're actually going to become aware that there's actually open wounds in our heart and in our mind. And Srila Satchidananda Swami says it's not going to be easy. We're going to have to be very honest with ourselves. And he, throughout the Manasa Shiksha, and Srila Satchidananda Swami said he did this practice where he actually would say to himself the various statements of Raghunath Das Goswami. And hence he's come to this understanding that actually on a psychological level, there's going to be many obstacles we're going to face on this path of devotion. And in fact, it can be quite embarrassing. So that's just putting things into perspective. So after one gains faith, Shraddha, in devotional service to Lord Krishna, then Raghunath Das Goswami reveals what one should or should not do after the accumulation of good fortune. And he does this by addressing and instructing his own mind. So it's in one's desperation on the devotional path, one can always go to that kind manual. I think there's 8 verses of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. So those open wounds we face and that we find in our hearts, or the terrible distresses in the mind from the previous torments we've gone through, we can actually take his prayers and help ourselves by addressing our own mind. And strength comes from just saying those particular statements of Raghunath Das Goswami, because he has an understanding of those particular obstacles that are there on the devotional paths. So I'm just bringing that to the surface because it's very important to know what one is dealing with. And in our text today, the Shrutis, whose conclusion is bhakti, they praise Krishna. And this is what Srila Jiva Goswami comments, that this particular statement we've read of the Shrutis, they're actually praising Lord Krishna. And from Srila Vishwanath, he's saying that they're establishing Vaishnava philosophy. So Srila Vishwanath, he attributes the following comment to the Shrutis. So here's him putting in his own words what the Shrutis are communicating. The eloquent proponents of the various contending materialistic philosophies mentioned in the previous 2 verses may consider themselves very wise, but they are in fact all deluded by Krishna's illusory potency, Maya. So through the particular torments of material life, there are different philosophers who've tried to tackle the issue, and they view themselves as being very wise. But actually the Shrutis are running this down, because they say that These philosophers who are considering themselves very wise, they've been deluded by Krishna's illusory potency, because there's a harsh reality there. So we can look at how it is that one is not deluded by Lord Krishna's illusory potency. And Krishna explains it. This is the only way. So, you don't see yourself as being very wise because you've kind of used your intellect to kind of put things into some sort of philosophical perspective. This is how you free yourself from the illusory potency, because anything you're doing just with your mental strength means that you're still under the control of the illusory potency of Lord Krishna. So this is how Krishna explains it. Having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never again fall into illusion. For by this knowledge you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. So this is very profound, because if you're using your intellect, you may not be thinking that actually you're under illusion. You may not be thinking that you need to actually search out somebody who's already self-realized. So Lord Krishna puts it in perspective. That's Bhagavad Gita 435 from the Jnana Yoga chapter, or the chapter of transcendental knowledge. So that establishment of the Vaishnava philosophy that the Shrutis are speaking about in this particular verse is that one will know things as they are. One will learn that all beings are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord Krishna as a result of receiving knowledge from a self-realized soul. So it's a very, very, very different position. This one where you're actually understanding, or there's an understanding that one is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord Krishna, versus trying to work independently to mentally make philosophical sense of the reality one finds oneself in. So it is the sense of an existence separate from Krishna, which is defined as Maya. And in the previous two statements of the Shruti, this idea of an existence separate from Krishna is examined. So in text 31, the Shrutis say, I'm just taking one sentence, neither material nature nor the soul who tries to enjoy her are ever born, yet living bodies come into being when these two combine, just as bubbles form when water meets the air. So very interesting. So without proper spiritual guidance, as Lord Krishna explained, that coming from a self-realized soul, one may see the description in the Vedas of the living beings emanating from the Lord to mean that they have come into being, and in this process that they will eventually pass into non-existence. You could understand it that way if you're not taking knowledge from a self-realized soul. So this hypothesis, that the living beings have come into being emanating from the Lord, and there's a possibility that they'll eventually pass into non-existence, it's refuted. It's a hypothesis that's refuted. This was examined about a week ago, but it's good to reiterate, to just know why the Shrutis are going to this trouble to talk about persons being under the control of the illusory energies, or persons even wrangling with philosophy are under the illusory energy of Krishna. So this hypothesis is refuted, and the reason it's refuted, that if the living beings have only temporary existence, means that they've come from the Lord and somewhere along the line they're just going to pass out of existence. This would mean that at death, their karma would simply vanish without being used up. So you accumulate karma during the course of your existence. So if there's a hypothesis that you're actually just going to pass into non-existence at some point, it means that what's going to happen to all that karma just doesn't get a chance to get used up. So it leaves something hanging there. And it would also mean that when a soul would be born, he would appear with unaccountable karma. He had done nothing to earn, because there's an understanding that actually the underlying understanding is that the soul coming into existence is bringing karma. And at the time of death, there's also continuing karma that travels with that soul into the next body. So hence, this particular hypothesis that it's just a temporary existence and then you pass into non-existence, it's completely demolished when you look at it very logically. And there's another implication from this view, and that would be that if one living entity becomes liberated, it would mean the total eradication of his identity and his being. So it's a hypothesis that's refuted on the philosophical level. And in text 30, the Shrutis say, if the countless living entities were all pervading and possessed forms that never change, you could not possibly be their ruler, O immutable one. So they're looking at another hypothesis. And this particular view comes from a school of thought, the Advaita Mayavadis, who propose that there's only one living entity and one power of illusion, producing the appearance of plurality. So, the idea we're all one, this is that idea. It means that there's one living entity and one power of illusion. But it just appears that there's many living entities. So such a hypothesis, it leads to the conclusion that when one living entity is liberated, then every living entity is liberated. I mean, if everybody's one. So if one becomes free from illusory energy, then everybody is free from illusory energy, or liberated. And if there are many kinds of ignorance to cover the living being, then each kind of ignorance will only cover some part of him. And that means that liberation is partial, because only certain parts of the living entity will become liberated, while other parts remain in bondage, because that's part of the theory too. So, or just looking at it from another angle. So these views, they see Krishna, the Absolute, as the impersonal Brahman. The idea that there's oneness. So from a self-realized person, Srila Prabhupada, he takes what's stated in Bhagavad Gita, and he says that the impersonal Brahman is the personal effulgence of Lord Krishna. So it has to go back to a supreme being. You cannot see that spiritual effulgence or that Brahman separated from a being. So the Brahman, or the Brahma Samhita states that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the cause of all causes. And that's Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Nadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. And that's text 1. Krishna, who's known as Govinda, is the Supreme Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He's the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he's the prime cause of all causes. So that's the self-realized soul, Lord Brahma. And Srila Prabhupada always points to this verse when there's a need to challenge this idea of there only being Brahman, that's oneness in terms of spiritual existence. So the implication is that all beings are expansions of Lord Krishna, just as millions of incarnations are his expansions. And Srila Prabhupada has the Vedas say, O Lord, you are the unlimited, eternal, and the living entities are the limited eternals. That's how he puts it, just to contend this whole philosophical argument. This comes from, in Krishna book, he's writing on this section. Lord, you the unlimited eternal, and the living entities are the limited eternals. So it's from the authoritative Vedas that one can understand both him who's greater than the greatest and him who's the smaller of the smallest, the individual soul. Now, Srila Vishwanath, going back to him, he continues, recognizing this general pattern of being deluded by Krishna's illusory potencies, Vaishnavas offer their pure love, bhavam is the word that is used, to Krishna in the devotional mood of servitude, friendship, and other mellows. So understanding things as they are, the living entities are produced by the material nature, but not independently. It is due to the impregnation of material nature by the Supreme Father that the living entities are present. So you cannot again separate the cause of the living entities. See, the analogy is used that the different parts of the body cannot be taken as equal to the whole. Rather, the whole body is the controller of the limbs. So that's a simple analogy. Because you want to make that distinction between the living entity and the Supreme Lord, the cause of all causes. So the analogy is used. You can't actually say that the different parts of the body are equal to the whole. Rather, the whole body is the controller of the limbs. So there has to be some controller. Similarly, the parts and parcels of the Supreme Whole are always dependent and are always controlled by the source of the parts and parcels. So again, that emphasis constantly on where the living entities are coming from. It's not material nature. Rather, it's the combination of the parts and parcels which are emanating from Lord Krishna with material nature by his will that the living entities are there. So by this knowledge, one will see that all living entities are part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. That's how Lord Krishna puts it. They are mine. That was Bhagavad Gita 4:30. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he highlights how Lord Krishna puts it in the same text of 4:30, that this is how he translates that text. All these above mentioned practitioners know the meaning of sacrifice and become purified of all sinful reactions by performing sacrifice. They partake the remnants of sacrifice known as nectar and ultimately merge into Brahman. So, very interesting. He's translating this particular text that we just read, where Krishna is saying that all these living entities, they are mine, they're parts and parcels coming from me. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is translating that same statement by saying that persons partake the remnants of sacrifice known as nectar and ultimately merge into Brahman. So interesting. You could see how there could be some confusion if one is not understanding this particular source of the living entities being the Supreme Lord. And they have the spiritual existence, but it's not that the spiritual existence has its termination in Brahman, the effulgence of Lord Krishna. There is that higher point of coming to directly come to know Lord Krishna. So we're all meant to satisfy Krishna, although we are separated parts. We're not different from him. And the living entities, as separated parts and parcels of the Supreme, they've got a purpose to fulfill. So bodily differences arise from forgetfulness of the Lord. So when one is engaged in transcendental service through Krishna consciousness, one becomes at once liberated from this illusion. So that's the particular significant point that allows for the proper understanding to come. That one is a separated part and parcel of the Lord, one has a purpose to fulfill. So when one is fulfilling that purpose, meaning one is engaged in transcendental service to the source of one being a part and parcel of the Lord, that particular same Lord, then one becomes liberated from illusion. So that's the significant part. And that's what allows many of the philosophical theories that are there to just fall away, because they're still operating under illusion, because they haven't come to this understanding of who they're connected to as spirit souls. So the question may be raised, how can the Vaishnavas overcome their material entanglement without a thorough analytic study of the Jiva and the Supreme Brahman, and without being disgusted with material life? So it's a question that's raised, and Srila Vishwanath raises it. I mean, don't you need to actually carefully analyze, do an analytical study of the Jiva and the Supreme Brahman? Don't you also have to be very disgusted with material life, before you can come to this point of actually truly wanting to take to devotional life? So the Vedas answer this, and they say that there's no chance of material illusion continuing to act on Krishna's devotee, because even at the earliest stage of devotional service, all fear and attachment are removed by the Lord's grace. So this is their point. And it's at this juncture that we can utilize Srila Raghunath Das Goswami's method of addressing one's mind, because there's this problem. There is a problem there. There is fear, there is attachment, and the Shrutis are saying that all of this is removed by the Lord's grace. But there has to be some method also, and one can really draw on Srila Raghunath Das Goswami addressing his mind, because that's what brings Lord Krishna's grace, when one remembers and tries to retrain the mind. So here's one of the statements of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami that one can use to help one's own mind. And this was, I think, text 4. And this is what he says. And it's something he's addressing his own mind, and one can use it for one's own attempt to actually help one's mind and invite the Lord's grace. While here on the revealed path of devotion, I've been attacked by the gang of my own lust, etc., who have bound my neck with the troublesome, dreadful ropes of wicked deeds. I'm being killed. Cry out piteously like this to the devotees of Sri Krishna, the destroyer of Baka. Oh mind, they will save you from these enemies. So when one is taken to the devotional path, one will become aware that actually there's suffering involved. And Srila Raghunath Das Goswami brings it to himself. It's a gang of my own lust, etc., my own lust, my own greed, my own wicked deeds that have suddenly have me bound up in dreadful ropes. I'm being killed. That's what it feels like. So he's addressing his mind and saying to his mind, cry out piteously like this to the devotees of Sri Krishna, the destroyer of Baka. O mind, they will save you from these enemies. So there's a realistic thing that, or what one has to face when one is taking to this path. So it's not a light thing. One will have that experience of almost like one's being killed. And that's only, as Srila Raghunath Das Goswami says, it's the ropes of one's own wicked deeds that are binding one. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that the gang of plunderers on the royal road, lust, anger, greed, illusion, false pride, envy, they're plunderers on the open road of one's spiritual life. These 6 muggers, so notice they're muggers, they attack their victim forcefully upon meeting together. And that explanation is also given by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 2:62 to 63, where he says, many anarthas are indulged by one who follows a path of false renunciation. So there has to be absolute honesty with oneself. Otherwise, it's called a path of false renunciation. Otherwise, you're just indulging your anarthas, you're indulging your lust, you're indulging your envy. So if a desire for material enjoyment surfaces in one's mind, one will develop attachment to that desire. And from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger is born. So one shuns material enjoyment due to a higher taste of spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. So one has to be extremely conscious of where one is actually being mugged by one's own, you could say, propensities, lustful or envious or prideful. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he states, these are his words, only because of the extreme desirelessness and deep feelings of humility that arise from the cultivation of devotion do the Vaishnavas still identify themselves as fallen in the material world. So it's not an immediate thing, but one is cultivating that to be desireless and have deep feelings of humility. But those same feelings can come about just because one is going through the difficulty of having this experience of literally being killed by the terrible muggers that are one's own lust, greed, envy, etc., or wicked deeds one's performed in the past. And as Srila Satchidananda Swami said, it can be most embarrassing, and it can be that one's confronting all kinds of open wounds. But this is the means. Recognizing that them for what they are, and the advice of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami to his own mind, experiencing this kind of suffering is to appeal to devotees of Lord Krishna. Actually, honestly declaring, I'm being killed. So there's a razor-sharp sword of time in the form of furrowing of your eyebrows. That's Srila Vishwanath talking what the statement was here of the Shrutis, with its 3 divisions of past, present, and future, which create fear of disease, death, and hellish suffering, only for those who fail to worship your lotus feet. So this is very interesting because you notice there's a completely different kind of suffering going on for those who haven't taken to the shelter of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna versus those who have. I've just described those who have and the kind of suffering they're experiencing. I mean, it's very extreme in the mind. But for those who haven't taken shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, there's just a fear of disease, there's a fear of death, there's a fear of suffering coming up in old age. So it's knowing what lies ahead that's creating the fear. For the Vaishnava, taken to the shelter of Krishna's lotus feet, the suffering is in the mind and the deeds of one's past, or if one makes a mistake to indulge some of those lower propensities of lust, anger, or greed, that's where suffering comes. So indeed, the process of humility is considered knowledge. So this is coming back to, the whole original statement of the Shrutis, that their philosophers are trying to actually understand the situation of a person in this world, but there has to be a process of actually coming to a point of humility. One can't sit in that prideful position that one's worked it out mentally or intellectually. There has to be a process of coming to humility, because that's actual knowledge. And that's how Krishna defines it. Actually, having humility is considered knowledge, because it allows for the possibility of approaching the absolute truth, Lord Krishna. So it's by this process of knowledge that one can approach the transcendental service of the Lord. So carrying that mood of humility is absolutely essential. So, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami's prayers, one may not have humility, but just repeating those prayers allows for an understanding of one's situation, and going through the agony of the whole thing brings humility. So, to complete the circle, approaching a bona fide spiritual master is another part of the process to achieve the same results. And this is Krishna, he spells it out, the whole picture of what knowledge is, because the Shrutis are discarding the proud philosophers who think they've got it worked out. And here's Lord Krishna's definition of knowledge. And notice, it's all to do with actually carrying a certain mood, a certain attitude. That's considered knowledge. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratifications, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, accepting the importance of self-realization and the search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge. And besides this, whatever there is ignorance. So Krishna defines what knowledge actually is. So Vaishnavas are not eager to defeat others' opinions, as we read in the purport, and establish their own, as other philosophies do, or they're prone to do. However, their eagerness lies in worshipping the Lord. And their conception of the absolute is that of the infinite ocean of personality and pastimes. So completely different conceptions. So we have these beautiful literatures that allow for the immersion in that ocean of personality and pastime. And this is the means of worshipping Lord Krishna. And the concepts of the Vaishnavas of themselves is always as servants. And this is the perfect conclusion of Vedanta philosophy. So that was an attempt to slightly explore the Shruti's statement and put it into a context, or perhaps a slightly different context, to just expand on it.
It's kind of
It's kind of beautiful.
The question that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur put forth, I was thinking on that, and it's wonderful that you quoted that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur asking that if one is not disgusted with material life, or if one not thoroughly study the nature of Brahman, then how you're going to be able to do anything, or to properly understand, because it appears that, as you were mentioned, that the Shrutis are sort of minimizing, in one sense, the whole philosophical the focus on jnana, or even the focus on trying to alleviate or liberation, trying to be free from material miseries, but actually is putting the focus on worshiping the Lord, loving service to the Lord. So um, the answer that Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti quote is them say that there's no possibility of overcoming anything, regardless if you approach it through dhyana or you approach it through tapasya or anything for liberation. There's no way without taking shelter of the Lord. So this taking shelter is saranagati. So a question for us, which was part of the class, quoting the Manasik Shiksha of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, you have to go through all these sufferings through the practice of devotional service. As you said, even in the road, the broad road of devotional service that we fortunately are being helped to go through, you find that still there's all these dacoits and plunderers that are attacking you, and in one sense they're killing you. One feels like that. So if that is the case, that shows that I'm not, as a devotee, fully in the position of full surrender. That could be a conclusion. I wanted to ask you some thoughts on that.
I suppose your question implies that one is holding on to certain attachments, and the fact that one is experiencing the suffering um, indicates that there's holding on to the attachments versus surrendering to Lord Krishna. Yeah. Yes, there is that understanding there, because one of the statements was that one is indulging one of those particular muggers. So one may be indulging, for instance, one's pride. So one may find oneself in a new position, a new title, new access to power and control, and one may choose to indulge that pride of that newfound position or of power and control, and the recognition that comes from it. And so the mistake that's been made there is that one is actually supporting the mugger, because that's one of the muggers, the pride, as opposed to understanding what's happening to oneself, that one is lining up with the mugger. And instead of seeing it that, oh, I've fallen prey to being mugged by pride. And if one understands properly that one has been mugged, one is going to start appealing, looking for some way to actually be freed from that grip of pride. And that kind of understanding is part of the surrendering process, where you're recognizing that you're teaming up with the mugger. You're going with the mugger. The mugger is pride. So you're indulging the bad quality, the maga, as opposed to recognizing what's happening. You fall and pray. So, indeed, it's not full surrender. In fact, it's surrendering to the maga and lining up with the maga. And the surrendering requires recognizing that one is actually being bound up with that pride. You actually are literally squeezing your life out by indulging in the pride. But that's the extraordinary part.
Yes, quite something. Because you're a devotee, and as a devotee, Krishna is making this arrangement. Like Srila Sachinandana Swami said, that it becomes embarrassing. It's embarrassing because things get exposed. And, and then when things get exposed, is then you realize when they're not exposed, you're thinking you're in the top of the world. As the what we're talking about devotees here, manasa shiksha is for devotees. So we're thinking, I'm in the top of the world. This Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur calls it Taranga Rangini, where I'm surfing on the top of the the wave of this. So yeah, so when it becomes exposed, is then when you realize, oh my God, I'm being mocked. like
It's most embarrassing.
what happens when you become embarrassed? But it's true. I mean, it was a very nice class, very well researched. Without humility, then what happens? Because you see that too, that there's a refuse, even when you become embarrassed and exposed, there may be a refuse to even acknowledge and accept that because pride, because of lack of humility. So it's such a danger, to be. There's not you really have to come to the position of humility and understanding that I've been healed, need help. Even in the road of devotional services, unless you really follow the process, you're really wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of, the different muggers. I mean, there was a listing of them. So, another example could be, getting mugged by greed. So one sees the opportunity to take something that somebody else has that looks very attractive. So you knock down somebody else and take over their particular work. And it seems that you're allowed to, you're entitled to that because you know how to do it better than somebody else. So that's another example. So meantime, your life, your spiritual life is getting squeezed out. You're actually being like bound up by that greed, but you don't recognize it because you feel you're entitled to that. So who's some lesser person doing that? You can do better than them. Yeah.
Talking a lot about mugging. What are the muggers taking?
What's the question?
What are the muggers taking from us?
Oh, what? Okay, the question is, what are the muggers taking from? There's within every living entity or every human being, there's little areas in the mind that make up a picture of themselves. So, it's commonly referred to as a false ego. So, a picture one has of one's identity. So, that picture that's formed through going through material life, because, we've all lived a good stretch of time and we've had a chance to build up a certain picture of ourselves. So, we may build up a picture that has a little corner that's our prideful corner. We're proud of XYZ. Or we have a little area where we indulge ourselves, so we give way to being greedy for certain things. But it's all okay because it's part of the picture we have of ourselves, because it seems that's necessary for one's very existence, that very picture one's upholding of oneself. So then one takes to devotional life, and those same things that are in the mind, that picture one has of oneself, that one's proud of, whatever one has put pride in, or seen as something that is part of oneself, that one holds dear to oneself. And then in devotional life, one may get that same area tapped into. So here you are on a path that is requiring being very vigilant about not giving way to something prideful, not giving way to things like being greedy, not giving way to being lustful, not giving way to being angry. So, and those things come if something's challenged or one wants to indulge, because one thinks those are part of one's very being, one's very identity. So in devotional life, there'll be moments when those very things are challenged. And if one gives way to them, forgetting that one is actually on a different path, one's cultivating a connection with Lord Krishna that requires one to not give way, then giving way means that one has joined forces with that pride, that envy, that lust, those areas in the mind that one is so up to date, looked after. They're actually muggers. We don't even realize that those are the very entities that are going to actually be killing one. So what they're taking from those muggers is taking from that, or they're feeding that space in one's mental identity of oneself, a space that one actually is trying to discard or forgets that one needs to discard, and actually then joins forces with those muggers and feeds it as forgetting the path one's on, that actually requires vigilance not to go down that road. And it's such a subtle thing because it's in the mind. It's so subtle. One may be completely oblivious that one is actually even doing it, because there's the safety of one is in a devotional space. One may even be in a physical building where devotion is practiced, but that vigilance is forgotten. So what they're taking from is that cherished personal identity, the things one's proud of, the areas that one feels entitled to be angry if it's touched, the area in one's mind where that one allows oneself some envy of someone else. That is what you could say, taking from. They're actually given power to control. So it's losing oneself. It's actually because oneself is a soul that's trying to transcend all that. So yeah, I hope that was somehow answered in some way.
Very nice.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much both for your very, very, very kind attention in this very large and empty temple room. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.